The snow had been falling for 3 days straight when Margha found the human man collapsed at the edge of her territory, his lips blue and his skin white as death itself. She had been checking her trap lines, the fur-lined hood of her cloak pulled low against the bitter wind that swept down from the northern peaks. The winter had come early this year, catching even the hardiest of creatures off guard. Margha had lived in these mountains for 5 years now, ever since her clan had cast her out for refusing to participate in a raid on a human settlement. She had argued that the humans in the valley below were farmers, not soldiers, and that attacking them would only bring more violence down upon their heads. Her father, the clan chief, had given her a choice: participate or leave. She had chosen exile. Now she lived alone in a sturdy cabin she had built herself, trapping and hunting to survive, speaking to no one but the occasional trader who was brave enough or desperate enough to venture into orc territory. She had grown accustomed to the solitude, even come to prefer it. No one questioned her choices here. No one looked at her with disgust for her soft heart, but the man lying half buried in the snowdrift was definitely going to complicate her peaceful existence. Margha approached cautiously, her hand on the knife at her belt. It could be a trap, though she doubted it. What human would be foolish enough to use one of their own as bait in weather like this? As she drew closer, she could see that he was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with dark hair plastered to his skull and frost forming on his eyelashes. He wore the clothing of a trapper or hunter: leather breeches, a wool shirt, and a coat that had probably been warm enough when he had set out but was now soaked through and frozen stiff. She crouched beside him and pressed her fingers to his throat. The pulse was there, but weak and irregular. His breathing was shallow, barely visible even when she leaned close. Frostbite had already claimed his fingers, which were a mottled purple-black, and probably his toes as well. If she left him here, he would be dead within the hour. Margha straightened and looked around. There was no sign of anyone else, no tracks leading to or from this spot except the man's own trail, which disappeared into the white curtain of falling snow. He had been traveling alone, which was either very brave or very stupid. Probably the latter. She should leave him. That was the smart thing to do. Humans feared orcs, hated them even. If he survived, he would likely repay her kindness with violence or at best with disgust. And if anyone discovered that she had sheltered a human, the consequences could be severe. Her own people would see it as further proof of her weakness, her betrayal of orcish values. The humans in the valley would assume she had harmed him, would perhaps send hunters after her. But even as these thoughts ran through her mind, Margha was already moving. She bent and hoisted the man over her shoulder, grunting at his dead weight. He was not small, probably close to 6 feet tall and solidly built, but her orcish strength made the burden manageable. She adjusted her grip and began the trek back to her cabin, moving as quickly as she could through the deepening snow. By the time she reached her door, her arms were burning, and her breath came in harsh gasps that clouded the frigid air. She kicked the door open and carried the man inside, grateful for the warmth that rushed out to greet her. The fire she had built that morning was still burning, though it had died down to coals. She would need to build it back up, and quickly. First, though, she needed to get the man out of his wet clothes. Margha laid him on the floor near the hearth and began stripping off his frozen garments. His coat came first, stiff as a board and coated in ice. Then his shirt, which stuck to his skin and had to be peeled away carefully. His chest was pale, almost translucent, and she could see his ribs standing out sharply. He had not been eating well, she noted. Perhaps he had been lost for days. His boots were next, and as she feared, his toes were in bad shape. Not as bad as his fingers, but bad enough. She would have to be careful with those. Frostbite was tricky. If she warmed him too quickly, she could do more harm than good. But if she warmed him too slowly, he would die anyway. Margha left him in his undergarments and hurried to build up the fire, adding logs until the flames leaped high. Then she grabbed every blanket and fur she owned and spread them on the floor beside the hearth. She lifted the man again, marveling at how cold he still felt, and laid him on the makeshift bed. She piled blankets on top of him, tucking them around his body to trap whatever heat he could still generate. But it was not enough. She could see that immediately. His shivering had stopped, which was a bad sign. It meant his body no longer had the energy to try to warm itself. His breathing remained shallow, his lips still blue. She pressed her fingers to his throat again and found his pulse even weaker than before. Margha sat back on her heels and cursed in Orcish. There was only one way to save him now, and it was going to be deeply uncomfortable for both of them. Skin-to-skin contact was the fastest way to transfer body heat. She had seen it done once, years ago, when a young orc had fallen through thin ice. The healer had stripped the boy naked and wrapped herself around him, sharing her warmth until he recovered. The man before her was not an orc boy. He was a human, a member of the species that had killed her uncle and two of her cousins in a border skirmish. A member of the species that called her people monsters and animals. But he was also dying, and she had not carried him all this way just to watch him slip away. She stood and began removing her own clothes. Her heavy cloak first, then her tunic and breeches, until she stood in nothing but her underthings. The fire warmed the front of her body, but her back was still cold. She hesitated for just a moment longer, then stripped off the last layer and pulled back the blankets covering the man. His skin was like ice against hers as she lay down beside him and pressed her body along the length of his. She pulled the blankets back over them both, creating a cocoon of warmth, and wrapped her arms around his chest. Her legs tangled with his, and she tucked his frozen hands against her belly, trying to warm them with her own body heat. It was incredibly awkward. She was acutely aware of every point where their bare skin touched, of the differences between their bodies. His skin was smooth where hers was rough. He was lean where she was muscular. Even unconscious and half dead, he smelled distinctly human, a scent she had learned to associate with danger. But slowly, gradually, she felt him begin to warm. It took over an hour before his shivering started again, violent tremors that shook his entire body. That was good, she told herself. Shivering meant his body was fighting back. She held him tighter, murmuring nonsense words in Orcish, the way her mother had once soothed her through childhood fevers. The night stretched on endlessly. Every time Margha thought about moving away, about putting her clothes back on and simply monitoring him from a distance, she would check his fingers or his pulse and find him still too cold, still too weak. So she stayed pressed against him, sharing her warmth, feeding the fire with one arm whenever it began to die down. Sometime near dawn, his shivering finally subsided. His breathing had deepened, becoming more regular. When she pressed her fingers to his throat, his pulse felt stronger, steadier. His lips were no longer blue, but had returned to a more natural pink. His fingers were still a worrying color, but they no longer felt like frozen meat. Margha allowed herself to relax slightly, though she did not move away. She was exhausted, having spent the entire night awake and pressed against a stranger. Her muscles ached from staying in one position for so long, but she had done it. He was going to live. As if in response to her thoughts, the man stirred. His eyelids fluttered and a small groan escaped his lips. Margha froze, suddenly very aware of their position, of the fact that she was completely naked and wrapped around him like a second skin. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. He blinked several times, his gaze sweeping across the unfamiliar ceiling, the stone walls, the crackling fire. Then his eyes found hers, and his entire body went rigid. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They simply stared at each other, human and orc, stranger and stranger. Margha watched the play of emotions across his face. Confusion, fear, understanding, and then, strangely, something that looked almost like gratitude. "You are awake," she said finally, her voice rough from disuse. She spoke in the common tongue, though her accent was thick. "That is good. I was not certain you would survive." The man's mouth opened, then closed again. He swallowed hard, his throat working. "You are an orc," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Margha agreed. There was no point in denying the obvious. "You saved me." "Yes." Another long pause. The man's eyes darted around again, taking in their situation more fully. "Are we?" He trailed off, a flush creeping up his neck despite the paleness of his skin. "You were dying from the cold," Margha explained, keeping her voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Your body could not warm itself." This was the only way. "How long?" "All night." The flush deepened. "I see. Thank you. You did not have to do that." "No," Margha agreed. "I did not." She could feel the awkwardness settling between them like a third presence. Carefully, she began to extract herself from the tangle of their limbs, pulling her arms back and shifting away from him. The cold air hit her skin immediately, raising goosebumps. She quickly pulled on her undergarments, then her tunic and breeches, very aware of his eyes on her back. When she was dressed, she turned to find him struggling to sit up, the blankets clutched to his chest. "Easy," she said, moving to help him. "You have been through much. Do not push yourself." He allowed her to prop him against the wall, though she could feel the tension in his body at her touch. When she drew back, he looked down at his hands and his expression crumpled. "My fingers," he said hoarsely. "Frostbite," Margha confirmed. "Your toes as well, though not as severe. You will likely lose some of them. I am sorry." He closed his eyes, and she saw him take a deep, shuddering breath. "Still better than being dead." "Yes." She moved to the other side of the room, needing the distance, and began preparing a simple breakfast of porridge and tea. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken questions. Finally, as she stirred the pot hanging over the fire, the man spoke again. "My name is Garrett Thorne," he said. "I am a trapper from the valley settlements. I was checking my northern lines when the storm hit. I tried to find shelter, but—" He shrugged helplessly. "Everything looked the same. I got turned around." "Margha," she replied. "No clan name, not anymore." "Why are you out here alone?" She glanced at him over her shoulder. "The same reason you are, I imagine, because I did not fit anywhere else." That seemed to resonate with him. He nodded slowly, then winced as the movement seemed to pain him. "How bad is it? Really?" Margha ladled porridge into 2 bowls and carried them over. She handed him one, along with a spoon, then settled herself a comfortable distance away. "Your fingers are the worst. The smallest 2 on your left hand will likely die. Perhaps the others can be saved if we are careful. Your toes I am less certain about. We will know more in the coming days." Garrett stared down at his hands, at the blackened fingertips. "I am right-handed," he said quietly. "That is something, at least." They ate in silence. Margha could see him struggling with the spoon, his damaged fingers refusing to cooperate properly. She pretended not to notice, giving him the dignity of managing on his own. When they had both finished, she took the bowls and went to rinse them in the water bucket by the door. "How long will I need to stay?" Garrett asked. "Until the storm passes and you have enough strength to travel." "Several days at least, perhaps a week. Longer if infection sets in." "And you are willing to let me stay?" "Even though I am human," Margha turned to face him. "I pulled you from the snow. I held you all night to keep you from dying. It would be foolish to cast you out now, would it not? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I suppose that is logical. I am exiled for my logic, Margha said dryly, or my lack of orcish bloodlust, depending on who you ask. That surprised him, she could see. You were exiled 5 years ago. I refused to raid a human settlement. My father gave me a choice, participate or leave. I chose to leave. Garrett studied her with new interest. That must have been difficult. Yes, she said simply, but less difficult than killing innocents to prove my loyalty. Another silence fell, but this one felt different, less awkward, more contemplative. Margha busied herself with tidying the cabin, putting things away, while Garrett watched the fire. She could feel him processing everything, trying to reconcile his preconceptions about orcs with the reality of the woman who had saved his life. Finally, he spoke again. I do not know what to say. Thank you feels inadequate. Then say nothing, Margha replied. Rest, recover, that will be thanks enough. Over the following days, an uneasy routine developed between them. Margha tended to Garrett's injuries, carefully monitoring the frostbite damage and doing what she could to minimize the infection risk. She made poultices from herbs she had dried over the summer and changed his bandages twice daily. It was intimate work, requiring her to handle his hands and feet with gentle precision, and at first he flinched every time she touched him. But gradually he began to relax around her. He would watch her as she moved about the cabin, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes he would ask her questions about her life in the mountains, about the animals she trapped and the plants she foraged. She answered honestly, finding that she enjoyed having someone to talk to after so many years of solitude. In turn, she learned about him. He was 26 years old, the youngest son of a farming family from the valley. He had taken up trapping because the farm could not support all of his father's children, and he had a talent for tracking animals. He had been working the Northern Territories for 3 years, long enough to know the land well, which made his near-death experience all the more humbling. I thought I was being careful, he admitted one evening as they shared a simple dinner of roasted rabbit and root vegetables. I have been through storms before, but this one came on so fast and so fierce, I have never seen anything like it. The mountains are unpredictable, Margha said. That is why I built my cabin in this valley. It is more sheltered than the higher elevations. Smart. He paused, then added, You built this yourself? Yes. It took most of the first summer, but it was necessary. I could not survive a winter without proper shelter. Garrett looked around the cabin with new appreciation. It was small but well constructed, with tight-fitting logs and a sturdy roof that did not leak even in the heaviest snow. The fireplace was properly vented, and she had built storage cubbies into the walls for her supplies. You are very skilled. Margha shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I do what is needed. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Margha woke to bright sunlight streaming through the small window, and when she opened the door, she found the world transformed into a sparkling wonderland of white. The snow had drifted in places as high as her waist, but the sky was clear and blue, and the wind had died to nothing more than a whisper. The weather has cleared, she announced to Garrett, who was sitting up now, looking stronger than he had days before. When you are well enough, you can return to your people. She expected relief on his face, maybe even eagerness. Instead, she saw something complicated flash across his features. How much longer do you think that will be? Margha examined his hands. The 2 smallest fingers on his left hand were clearly dead, black and withered. She would need to remove them soon to prevent infection from spreading. The others were healing, though they would always bear scars. His feet were better. He would likely keep all of his toes, though he would probably have reduced sensation in some of them. "A few more days," she said. "I need to remove the dead fingers, and you need to regain your strength for the journey. Will you? Can you do it? The removal." "I have done it before. It will hurt, but it must be done." He nodded, his jaw set. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. I will give you willow bark tea for the pain, and I have strong spirits for sterilization. It will not be pleasant, but you will survive it." That night, Margha noticed that Garrett was quieter than usual. He picked at his dinner and stared into the fire with a furrowed brow. Finally, she could not ignore it any longer. "You are troubled," she observed. He glanced at her, then back at the fire. "I am thinking about tomorrow. About going home. You do not wish to return." "I do. Of course I do. My family will be worried, but—" He trailed off, struggling with his words. "When I tell them what happened, when I tell them an orc saved my life, they will not believe me, or worse, they will believe me and be horrified." Margha felt something cold settle in her chest. "You think they would have preferred you to die?" "No, not that. But they have been taught their entire lives that orcs are monsters, that you cannot be trusted, that you are violent and cruel. If I tell them the truth, it will challenge everything they believe." "And you?" Margha asked quietly. "What do you believe?" Garrett looked at her directly then, his eyes serious. "I believe you saved my life when you could have left me to die. I believe you have shown me nothing but kindness. I believe that everything I was taught about orcs was, at the very least, incomplete." Something warm unfurled in Margha's chest, something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of it. "Your people are not wrong about all orcs," she said carefully. "My clan is violent. They raid and kill. I left because I could not be part of that. But there are reasons they are that way, reasons that go back generations. Humans have killed orcs. Orcs have killed humans. It is a cycle that feeds itself." "Someone has to break the cycle," Garrett said. "Yes. But it is hard to be the one who tries, as I think you are learning." He smiled wryly. "Yes, it is." The next morning, Margha prepared everything she would need for the surgery. She had a sharp knife that she heated until it glowed red, then plunged into a pot of strong alcohol. She laid out clean bandages and her container of poultice. She made Garrett drink 2 cups of willow bark tea and a generous measure of the spirits, hoping it would dull the pain at least a little. When he was as ready as he would ever be, she had him sit at the table with his hand flat on the wooden surface. She positioned the knife and looked at him. "Ready," he nodded, his face pale but determined. She worked quickly and efficiently, cutting through the dead tissue where it met the living. Garrett made a choked sound but did not cry out. Blood welled, and she immediately pressed bandages to the wounds, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed. Then she packed the stumps with her poultice and wrapped them tightly. "It is done," she said, sitting back. Garrett was breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "2 fingers," he said, his voice slightly slurred from the alcohol. "Not so bad, I have 8 left." "You did well," Margha told him. "Rest now. The worst is over." She helped him back to his bed of furs and blankets, and he fell into a fitful sleep almost immediately. Margha cleaned up the blood and disposed of the severed fingers, wrapping them carefully before burying them in the snow outside. It was grim work, but necessary. For the next 2 days, she monitored the wounds closely, watching for any signs of infection. Garrett ran a slight fever the first day, which worried her, but by the second day it had broken and his color was better. He was healing, she realized with relief. He would be fine. On the 7th day since she had found him, Garrett announced that he felt strong enough to attempt the journey back to the valley. Margha helped him bundle into borrowed furs, as his own coat was still too damaged to wear. She packed him food for the journey and gave him detailed directions to follow the stream down from her valley. As they stood at the door, preparing to say goodbye, Margha found that she did not want him to leave. It surprised her, the strength of the feeling. She had grown accustomed to his presence, to having someone to talk to in the evenings. The cabin would feel very empty without him. "I will not tell anyone where you live," Garrett said, as if reading her thoughts. "I will not bring anyone here, I know," Margha replied. "But I would like to visit, if you would permit it, in the spring, perhaps, when the weather is better." She looked at him in surprise. "You would come back?" "Yes, if you would have me." Something in his eyes made her heartbeat quicken. There was sincerity there and something else. Something that made her both nervous and hopeful. "I would not object," she said carefully. "Then I will come." He held out his right hand, and after a moment she took it. His grip was firm despite the bandages still wrapped around some of his fingers. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, and Margha felt something pass between them. An understanding, perhaps, or a promise. Then Garrett released her hand and stepped out into the snow. "Thank you, Margha," he said, turning back to look at her one last time. "For everything." "Travel safely, Garrett Thorne." She watched until he disappeared into the trees, following the path she had described. Then she closed the door and returned to her cabin, which suddenly felt vast and empty. She told herself she was being foolish. He was just a human she had helped, nothing more. But the empty weeks that followed proved her wrong. She found herself thinking about him constantly, wondering if he had made it home safely, if his family had welcomed him back, if he had told them about her. She caught herself listening for footsteps outside her door, even though she knew it was far too soon for him to return if he returned at all. Winter deepened, and the snows came again, burying her valley under layers of white. Margha went about her routines, checking her traps, preparing her meals, maintaining her cabin. But the solitude that had once been peaceful now felt oppressive. She had tasted companionship again, and its absence left a hollow ache in her chest. She told herself she was being ridiculous. She had lived alone for 5 years. She could continue to do so. She did not need a human man in her life, especially one whose people would hate him if they knew about his friendship with her. It was better this way, safer for both of them. But late at night, as she lay in her bed of furs, she would remember the feeling of his cold body pressed against hers, the way his pulse had gradually strengthened under her fingers. She would remember the conversations by the fire, the way he had looked at her without fear. And she would wonder if he was remembering too. The winter solstice came and went. The days slowly began to lengthen again, though the cold remained fierce. Margha celebrated her 29th birthday alone, marking another year of exile with a cup of mead she had been saving. Then, on a bright morning in late winter, she heard a sound that made her heart leap into her throat, the crunch of footsteps in the snow, approaching her cabin. She grabbed her knife and moved to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate. A single person, not a group. They came straight to her door without hesitation, as if the walker knew exactly where they were going. A knock sounded. "Margha, it is Garrett. May I enter?" She yanked the door open so fast she nearly hit herself with it. Garrett stood on her threshold, bundled in a new coat and looking healthy and whole. His face lit up when he saw her, a smile breaking across his features that made something warm bloom in her chest. "You came back," she said, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. "I said I would." He held up his left hand, showing her the healed stumps where his 2 fingers had been. "See, all healed. You did good work." Margha stepped aside to let him in, and he stamped the snow from his boots before entering. As he shrugged out of his coat, she saw that he was carrying a pack bulging with supplies. "I brought gifts," he said a little shyly. "I was not sure what you might need, so I brought a variety. sugar, salt, tea, flour, some medicines from the apothecary in town. And this. He reached into the pack and pulled out a book, leather-bound and well-worn. I thought you might enjoy reading. I know the winters are long. Margha took the book with trembling hands. It was a collection of old stories, tales from before the wars between humans and orcs. She had not held a book in years. "This is too much," she said hoarsely. "It is not nearly enough," Garrett replied. "Not for what you did for me." She set the book carefully on the table and looked at him, really looked at him. He seemed different somehow, more confident perhaps. Or maybe just more certain of his place. "How did your family react?" she asked. "When you told them what happened?" His expression grew complicated. "I did not tell them everything. I said I found shelter in an abandoned cave, that I survived on my own. I did not think they were ready to hear the truth." "And how did that feel? To lie to them?" "Terrible," Garrett admitted. "But I did not want to put you at risk. If they knew about you, some of them might have wanted to come looking, to verify your existence or worse. I could not take that chance." Margha felt her throat tighten. "You protected me, of course. You saved my life. The least I could do was protect your privacy." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Margha felt the air between them grow charged with something she did not quite have words for. Finally, she forced herself to move to break the tension. "You must be tired from your journey. Sit. I will make tea." As she busied herself with the kettle, Garrett settled at the table. "I have been thinking about you all winter," he said suddenly, her hands stilled. "Have you?" "Yes. About what you said. About the cycle of violence between our peoples. About how someone has to break it." He paused. "I want to be part of breaking it. I want to find a way for humans and orcs to coexist peacefully." Margha turned to look at him. "That is a large ambition." "I know. But it has to start somewhere, does it not? Maybe it starts with one human and one orc, choosing to see each other as people instead of enemies." "And you think we can be that?" "I think we already are." The kettle began to whistle, giving Margha an excuse to turn away and collect herself. Her heart was pounding and her thoughts were a jumbled mess. She poured the tea with hands that shook slightly, then carried the cups to the table. Garrett accepted his cup with a nod of thanks. "How have you been?" he asked. "Truly." "Lonely," Margha admitted before she could stop herself. "The cabin felt very empty after you left." His eyes widened slightly. "I felt the same. The valley settlement suddenly seemed so crowded, so noisy. I kept thinking about the peace of your mountains." "You could stay for a few days," Margha offered, trying to keep her voice casual. "If you wanted. I have supplies enough for 2. "I was hoping you would say that. I brought enough food for a week, maybe 2 if we are careful." They smiled at each other and Margha felt something settle in her chest. He was here. He had come back, just as he promised, and he wanted to stay. The days that followed were some of the happiest Margha had known since her exile. She and Garrett fell into an easy rhythm, dividing the chores between them. He insisted on helping despite his injured hand, proving himself capable at tasks like chopping wood and hauling water. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk for hours, or Margha would read aloud from the book he had brought while Garrett listened, his eyes half closed in contentment. She showed him her territory, taking him on walks through the snowy forest to check her trap lines. He was impressed by her tracking skills and her knowledge of the land. In turn, he shared his own expertise, pointing out signs of animal passage that she had missed and teaching her tricks for setting more effective snares. They laughed together often, finding humor in small things. Garrett told her stories about his family, about his brothers and sisters and their various misadventures. Margha shared memories from before her exile, careful to focus on the good times rather than the painful end. But underneath the easy companionship, Margha was aware of a growing tension. She found herself noticing things about Garrett that she had not paid attention to before. The way his hair fell across his forehead when he bent over a task, the sound of his laugh, warm and genuine, the strength in his arms when he lifted heavy loads, the kindness in his eyes when he looked at her. She told herself it was nothing, just gratitude or the natural affection that developed between friends, but she knew she was lying to herself. On the 5th night of his visit, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Garrett suddenly said, "Margha, can I ask you something personal?" She looked at him warily. "You can ask, I may not answer." "Fair enough." He took a deep breath. "Have you ever thought about taking a mate, having a family?" The question caught her completely off guard. For a moment she could only stare at him. "Why do you ask?" she finally managed. "Because I have been thinking about it, about what my future looks like, and I find that—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I find that I cannot imagine it without you in it." Margha's heart began to pound. "Garrett." "I know it is complicated," he continued, the words coming faster now, as if he needed to get them all out before he lost his nerve. "I know our peoples are enemies. I know that being together would make life harder for both of us. But I cannot stop thinking about you. I tried all winter. I tried to put you out of my mind, to think of you as just someone who helped me. But it did not work." "Garrett," she said again, her voice shaking. "I care about you, Margha, more than I have ever cared about anyone, and I hope, that maybe you feel the same." She should deny it. She should send him away, tell him it was impossible, that they could never be together. But she was so tired of lying, of hiding her feelings. "Yes," she whispered. "I feel the same." The relief on his face was palpable. He stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling before her so they were at eye level. "Then we can figure out the rest," he said. "Together. It will not be easy, I know. Your people will hate you. My people already hate me, I know. You could lose everything." "Not everything," Garrett said, reaching out to take her hand. "Not the thing that matters most." Margha felt tears prickling at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. Orcs did not cry, her father had always said, but she was not living by her father's rules anymore. She squeezed Garrett's hand and allowed a single tear to trace down her cheek. "I am afraid," she admitted. "So am I, but I think this fear is worth facing." She pulled him up and wrapped her arms around him, holding him close. He was warm and solid against her, and she could feel his heart beating against her chest. "Stay," she said into his shoulder. "Do not go back. Stay here with me." "I cannot. Not yet. I have responsibilities in the valley. My family depends on the income from my trapping, but I will return as often as I can. And maybe, eventually, we can find a way to be together openly." It was not the answer she wanted, but it was realistic. She pulled back and nodded. "Then I will wait." Garrett cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "I will not make you wait long. I promise." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Margha did not pull away. She closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was both tentative and sure. It was her first kiss, and she suspected it might be his as well. It was clumsy and sweet and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. Garrett rested his forehead against hers, and they stayed like that for a long moment, simply breathing together. "I should warn you," Margha said eventually, a hint of humor in her voice. "I have no idea what I am doing. Orcs do not. We do not court the way humans do." Garrett laughed. "That makes two of us. We will figure it out as we go." They did not sleep together that night, not in the way they had when he was dying from frostbite. But Margha did push the two beds close together, and they lay side by side, fingers intertwined, talking quietly until exhaustion finally claimed them. It felt more intimate than the night of skin-to-skin contact had been, because this time it was a choice. This time it meant something beyond mere survival. When Garrett left 3 days later, the parting was bittersweet. They stood at the door of the cabin, holding each other tightly, reluctant to let go. 2 weeks, Garrett promised. Maybe 3 at most, then I will be back. I will be here. He kissed her one more time, then turned and walked away. Margha watched him go, but this time the ache in her chest was different. It was still painful, but it was also full of hope. He would come back. She believed that now. True to his word, Garrett returned in just over 2 weeks, and then again 2 weeks after that. A pattern developed over the late winter and early spring. He would come to her mountain refuge, stay for several days, then return to the valley to conduct his business. With each visit, they grew closer. They learned each other's bodies and hearts, navigating the uncharted territory of an interspecies relationship with a combination of humor and earnestness. Margha learned that Garrett was ticklish behind his knees, that he loved honey in his tea, that he had a beautiful singing voice he was shy about using. Garrett learned that Margha was stronger than any human woman but gentle with small creatures, that she had a talent for whittling, that she dreamed sometimes of returning to her clan and being accepted despite her differences. They made love for the first time on a warm spring evening, with the door open to let in the fresh air and the sound of the stream running high with snowmelt. It was awkward and wonderful, and nothing like either of them had imagined. Afterward, they lay tangled together and laughed at themselves, giddy with joy and the newness of it all. "I love you," Garrett said, the words tumbling out naturally. "I think I have loved you since you saved my life, but I was too afraid to admit it." "I love you too," Margha replied, marveling at how right the words felt. "I think I have been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it." But their happiness existed in a bubble, separate from the reality of the world outside. Margha knew it could not last. Eventually, they would have to face the fact that their relationship was forbidden, taboo, dangerous for both of them. She just wanted a little more time before that confrontation arrived. The confrontation came sooner than she expected. It was early summer, and the mountain meadows were carpeted with wildflowers. Garrett had been visiting for nearly a week, the longest he had stayed yet. They had spent the morning gathering herbs, and they were walking back to the cabin, arms around each other, when they heard the sound of voices. Margha froze. She knew those voices. They spoke in Orcish, rough and aggressive, and they were getting closer. "Go inside," she hissed at Garrett. "Hide." "Margha, what now?" He must have heard the urgency in her voice because he did not argue. He ran for the cabin while Margha moved to intercept the approaching orcs. Her mind was racing. How had they found her? She had been so careful to stay isolated, to leave no trail that could lead her clan to her refuge. 3 orcs emerged from the tree line, all male, all warriors she recognized from her old clan. Her heart sank. The leader was Grom, one of her father's most trusted fighters and a longtime advocate for violence against humans. "Margha," Grom said, his tone mocking, "it has been a long time." "What are you doing here?" she demanded, keeping her voice hard. "Looking for you, of course. We heard interesting rumors. A human trapper who disappeared in a storm last winter, then reappeared weeks later with no explanation and missing fingers. He has been making regular trips into the mountains ever since. We wondered what could be so interesting up here." Margha's blood ran cold. They knew about Garrett. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, but even she could hear the lie in her voice. Grom's eyes narrowed. "Do not insult my intelligence. We followed his trail. It leads right to your cabin. You are harboring a human, are you not? After all these years, you are still betraying your kind." "I am not harboring anyone. I live alone." "Then you will not mind if we search your home." The 3 orcs moved forward and Margha stepped into their path. You are not welcome here. This is my territory. Leave. Grom actually laughed. Your territory? You have no territory. You are clanless. You have no rights, no protections. Step aside. No, they rushed her all at once. Margha was strong, but she was 1 against 3, and they were trained warriors. She managed to throw one of them to the ground and land a solid punch on another, but Grom got behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her off her feet. Hold her, he snarled to the others. They pinned her arms, and she struggled furiously, but it was no use. Grom marched toward the cabin door and kicked it open. No, Margha screamed. Grom disappeared inside. There was a crash, the sound of a struggle, and then he emerged dragging Garrett by the collar of his shirt. Garrett's face was bruised and he was breathing hard, but he was alive. Well, well, Grom said. What do we have here? A human pet. How far you have fallen, Margha. Let him go, Margha demanded, still fighting against the orcs holding her. He has done nothing wrong. He exists, Grom replied. That is crime enough, but more than that, he has corrupted you, turned you even further against your people. For that he must die. No, please, Grom, if you have any mercy, mercy, for a human. Grom drew his knife and pressed it to Garrett's throat. You taught us that mercy is weakness, Margha. You and your soft heart, you were never fit to be one of us. Garrett met Margha's eyes. There was fear there, but also determination. It is all right, he said quietly. I do not regret anything. Something broke inside Margha. All the anger and hurt and loneliness of the past 5 years, all the love and hope she had found with Garrett, everything came rushing together in a desperate fury. She threw her head back, smashing into the face of one of the orcs holding her. He yelled and his grip loosened. She twisted free and lunged at Grom. She hit him like a battering ram, carrying them both to the ground. Garrett rolled away, clutching his throat where the knife had nicked him. Margha grappled with Grom, fighting for control of the weapon. She was vaguely aware of the other orcs converging on her, but she did not care. All that mattered was protecting Garrett. She got her hand on the knife hilt and wrenched it away. Grom grabbed her wrist, slamming it against the ground until her fingers opened and the knife skittered away. They rolled across the dirt, punching and clawing at each other. You have lost your mind, Grom roared. Fighting your own kind for a human, you are a disgrace. He is worth more than the whole clan. Margha shot back, landing a solid punch to his jaw. Then the other orcs were pulling her off, dragging her away from Grom. She kicked and bit and fought with everything she had, but she could not break free. Grom climbed to his feet, wiping blood from his split lip. Enough, he said coldly. He retrieved his knife and stalked toward Garrett, who was trying to stand. Grom, please, Margha begged, hating herself for the desperation in her voice. Please, I will do anything. Just let him live. Grom paused. Anything? Yes. He considered this, his expression calculating. Return to the clan. Prove your loyalty. Participate in the next raid. I cannot. Then he dies. Wait. Garrett's voice rang out, clear and strong despite the blood trickling from his throat. You want her to prove herself by killing humans. Then let her kill me. If she does it herself, your honor is satisfied, is it not? Everyone went still. Margha stared at Garrett in horror. No, no, I would never, it makes sense, Garrett continued, his eyes never leaving hers. There was something in his gaze, a message she could not quite read. She saves face. You get what you want. Everyone goes home satisfied. Grom's eyes gleamed. Clever for a human. Yes, that would work. Margha, you heard him. Kill the human and return to the clan, or refuse and we kill you both. The orcs holding her released her. Someone pressed Grom's knife into her hand. She looked down at it, then up at Garrett. He was watching her calmly, trust and love written plainly on his face. Do it, he said softly. Trust me. She understood then. He was giving her a way out, but it required her to play along to make them believe she would actually do this. Her hand tightened on the knife hilt. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I know," Garrett replied. She moved toward him, the knife raised. Grom and the others watched eagerly, hungry for violence. Margha's mind was racing, trying to find a way out of this, trying to figure out what Garrett's plan was. She was 3 steps away when everything happened at once. Garrett suddenly dropped and rolled to the side. At the same moment, arrows whistled through the air, striking 2 of the orcs. They dropped with choked cries. Grom spun, his hand going to his weapon, but Margha was faster. She lunged at him, driving her shoulder into his chest and bearing him to the ground. From the trees, humans emerged. Trappers, by the look of them, armed with bows and knives. There were at least 8 of them, and they spread out to surround the remaining orcs. "Easy now," one of them said, his bow trained on Grom. "Nobody else needs to die today." Margha looked at Garrett, understanding dawning. "You brought them." "Insurance," he explained, climbing to his feet. "I told them where I was going in case something went wrong." "I am sorry, I should have warned you, but I did not want you to worry." Grom snarled something in Orcish, a vile insult. Margha pressed the knife harder against his throat. "Give me one good reason not to kill you right now," she said in the same language. "Because I am not worth it," Grom replied. "Because killing me will not change anything. The clan will just send someone else." He was right, and Margha hated him for it. She looked up at the humans, expecting to see hatred or fear in their faces. Instead, she saw wariness, yes, but also something like respect. "What will you do with them?" She asked Garrett. "Let them go," he said, "but not before they hear what I have to say." He switched to heavily accented Orcish, speaking slowly so everyone could understand. "I am Garrett Thorne. This woman saved my life. She is honorable and brave, more so than any of you. If you come after her again, you will deal with me and my people. Leave her alone. Leave us alone. That is the only warning you will get." One of the other trappers stepped forward. He was older, grizzled, with the look of someone who had seen hard fighting. "I second that. Word is spreading in the valley about what happened last winter, about an orc who showed mercy. We are willing to leave you alone if you leave us alone, but if you bring violence here, we will answer it in kind." Grom looked between Margha, Garrett, and the armed humans. Margha could see him calculating the odds. Finally, he nodded slowly. "You have made your choice, Margha. You are not orc anymore. You are not clan. If we meet again, it will be as enemies." "We already are enemies," Margha replied. "We have been since the day you tried to make me kill innocents." She released him and stepped back. Grom climbed to his feet and gestured to the remaining orc. They retrieved their wounded and their dead, then disappeared into the forest without another word. When they were gone, the tension drained out of Margha all at once. She swayed on her feet, and Garrett was there immediately, his arm around her waist. "I have you," he murmured. "You are safe." The older trapper approached cautiously. "You are Margha, I take it. Garrett has told us about you." She looked at Garrett in surprise. "You told them?" "I had to. After today, after nearly dying, I realized I could not keep living a double life. I told my family the truth. I told them about you, about how you saved me, about how we care for each other. And they did not hate you for it. Some did," Garrett admitted. "My oldest brother called me a traitor and will not speak to me, but others understood. My mother, my sisters. They said if you were good enough to save my life, you were good enough to be welcomed. And these men," he gestured to the trappers, "they volunteered to come with me today in case I needed help." Margha looked at the humans, really looked at them. They were watching her warily, but there was no hatred in their eyes. Just curiosity and, perhaps, a cautious willingness to see her as something other than an enemy. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling strange and heavy on her tongue. "You did not have to do this." Garrett is one of us, the older man said gruffly. We take care of our own. And he says you are one of us too now, so we take care of you as well. Margha felt her throat tighten again. After 5 years of exile, of believing she would never belong anywhere, these strangers were offering her acceptance. It was overwhelming. The trappers did not stay long. They helped Margha and Garrett clean up the signs of the fight, then melted back into the forest, leaving the two of them alone once more. That night, they sat by the fire, pressed close together. Garrett had a bandage around his throat where Grom's knife had cut him, and Margha had bruises blooming across her face and arms. But they were alive, and they were together. "What happens now?" Margha asked quietly. "Now we figure out what our life looks like," Garrett replied. "Together. Not hiding anymore. Your people will not all accept me." "No," he agreed. "Some will always see you as the enemy, but some will see you as I do, as the woman who saved my life, as someone brave and kind and worthy of respect. That is a start. And your family, will they truly welcome me?" Garrett took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "My mother wants to meet you. She said any woman strong enough to keep me alive through a blizzard is someone she wants to know. My sisters are curious. My father is reserving judgment but willing to give you a chance." "That is more than I expected." "It is more than I expected too," Garrett admitted, "but people can surprise you if we give them the chance." They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance. Finally, Margha spoke again. "I cannot leave this mountain. This is my home now. I know. And I would not ask you to, but maybe I could stay here with you permanently." Margha's heart stuttered. "You would give up your life in the valley." "I would not be giving it up, not entirely. I could still trap these mountains, still trade with the settlements. But my home would be here, with you." He turned to face her fully. "If you will have me, Garrett, you cannot just, I can. I already told my family I was considering it. They were not thrilled, but they understood. Margha, I am tired of living two separate lives. I want to be with you, fully. Completely. No more hiding, no more pretending, just us building a life together." She searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. There was none. He meant every word. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, I will have you. I want that too." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring all of his love and commitment into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. "We will need to expand the cabin," Margha said practically. "It is too small for two people living here permanently." Garrett laughed. "Always practical. Yes, we will expand it, and we will need a better cold storage, and maybe a workshop if I am going to be doing leatherwork here. And a garden. I have been wanting to plant vegetables, but it seemed like too much work for one person." They spent the rest of the evening planning, discussing all the improvements they would make to turn Margha's solitary cabin into a true home for both of them. It was a mundane conversation, full of practical details, but it filled Margha with a profound sense of contentment. This was what she had been missing. Someone to share her life with, someone to plan a future with. Over the following weeks, word of what had happened spread through both the orc clans and the human settlements. Reactions were mixed. Some orcs saw Margha as even more of a traitor now, having chosen a human over her own kind. But others, particularly younger orcs who were tired of the endless cycle of violence, began to whisper that perhaps she had the right idea. Perhaps there was another way. Among the humans, Garrett's relationship with Margha became something of a scandal. Some called him a race traitor, others a fool. But there were also those who saw it as a sign of hope, a possible bridge between two peoples who had been at war for generations. Slowly, cautiously, a few other humans began to visit Margha's mountain. They came out of curiosity at first, wanting to see the orc woman who had saved one of their own. But some stayed longer, talking with Margha, learning about her life and her perspective. She answered their questions honestly, neither downplaying the violence of her people nor excusing the prejudices of the humans. Similarly, a few outcast orcs found their way to her cabin, drawn by rumors of a place where they could live without constant warfare. Margha welcomed them, offering advice and sometimes shelter. She began to build a small network of individuals, both orc and human, who were willing to try coexistence. It was not a grand revolution. It was not a treaty or a peace accord. It was just a handful of people, choosing to see each other as individuals rather than enemies. But it was a start. Garrett proved true to his word. He moved permanently into the expanded cabin, bringing with him his tools and his possessions. He continued to trap and trade, but now Margha sometimes accompanied him to the settlements. At first, people stared and whispered. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts. But as time passed and Margha caused no trouble, committed no violence, the fear began to fade. Some people even began to greet her, cautious but polite. Garrett's mother was the first of his family to visit the mountain cabin. She came in late summer, a small, sturdy woman with hair gone gray and eyes that missed nothing. She looked Margha up and down, then nodded once. "You are taller than I expected," she said. "Most humans say that," Margha replied. "My son says you saved his life." "I did what anyone should do. I helped someone in need." Garrett's mother smiled slightly. "Not anyone would have helped an enemy. You have a good heart. That matters more than the color of your skin." They had tea together, the three of them, and talked about everything and nothing. Garrett's mother told stories about his childhood, embarrassing him thoroughly. Margha found herself laughing genuinely, something she had rarely done before Garrett entered her life. When his mother left, she hugged Margha carefully, and Margha felt something in her chest loosen a little more. Other visits followed. Garrett's youngest sister came, curious and chattering. One of his brothers came, grudging but willing to give Margha a chance. Not everyone in Garrett's family accepted her, and that was painful, but enough did that she began to feel like she had a place in his world. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant reds and golds, Garrett took Margha on a long walk to a high meadow that overlooked both her valley and the human settlements below. The view was breathtaking, a patchwork of forests and fields stretching to the horizon. "I have been thinking," Garrett said as they stood hand in hand, surveying the land, "about our future, about what comes next. And what have you concluded?" He turned to face her, reaching into his pocket. "I have concluded that I want to spend the rest of my life with you, officially. Permanently." He pulled out a simple ring, carved from wood and polished until it gleamed. "Margha, will you marry me?" She stared at the ring, her mind reeling. Marriage was a human custom, not an orcish one. Orcs mated, sometimes for life, but there were no ceremonies or rings. Yet looking at the carefully carved band, seeing the hope and love in Garrett's eyes, she found that she wanted this. She wanted the symbol, the commitment, the promise of forever. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, there on the mountaintop with the whole world spread out before them. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "How do we do this?" Margha asked. "I do not know human marriage customs." "Neither do I, really," Garrett admitted. "I have only been to a few weddings, but we will figure it out. We always do." They planned a small ceremony for the first snow of winter, a joining of the season when they had met. Garrett's mother helped with the arrangements, navigating the delicate politics of who to invite and how to structure the event. It would not be a traditional human wedding, she explained, because this was not a traditional union. They would have to make their own traditions. The ceremony was held outside Margha's cabin on a clear, cold day. The first snowflakes were just beginning to fall, dusting everything in white. A small group gathered. Garrett's mother and siblings who had accepted Margha, a handful of trappers who had become friends, and even 3 young orcs who had sought refuge with Margha over the autumn months. There was no priest or official to conduct the ceremony. Instead, Garrett and Margha stood facing each other, hands clasped, and spoke their vows directly to one another. "I vow to stand by your side," Garrett said, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "In good times and hard times, in peace and in conflict. I vow to see you as you are, not as others think you should be. I vow to love you, to respect you, to build a life with you that honors both of our peoples." Margha's turn came, and she found the words rising from somewhere deep inside her. "I vow to protect you, to support you, to share my life and my home with you. I vow to be honest, to be brave, to face whatever comes with you at my side. I vow to love you as I have never loved anyone, with all the strength and gentleness I possess." There were no rings beyond the wooden one Garrett had already given her, but he had carved a matching one for himself. They exchanged them again, formally this time, sliding the simple bands onto each other's fingers. Garrett's mother stepped forward. "These two have chosen each other," she announced to the gathered witnesses. "Against all odds, against all expectations, they have proven that love can bridge any divide. Let us honor their choice and their courage." She turned to Garrett and Margha. "You may kiss." And they did, to scattered applause and even some cheers from the young orcs. When they broke apart, snow was falling more steadily, coating their hair and shoulders. Margha looked out at the mixed group of humans and orcs who had come to witness their union, and she felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what the world could be if more people were willing to try. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. They had roasted a deer and made simple bread and cakes. Someone had brought mead, and they passed the bottle around, toasting the newlyweds. The humans taught the orcs some of their songs, and the orcs shared some of their own, creating a strange but beautiful blend of cultures. As the party wound down and the guests began to depart, offering congratulations and well wishes, Margha and Garrett stood at the door of their cabin, waving goodbye. When the last visitor had disappeared into the trees, they turned to each other. "We did it," Garrett said softly. "We did," Margha agreed. "We are married. How do you feel?" She considered the question. "Happy, terrified, hopeful, all at once." "That sounds about right." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I love you, wife. I love you too, husband." They went inside together, closing the door on the cold and the snow. The fire was burning brightly, warming the cabin they had built together. This was their home now, truly and completely. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The winter that followed was harsh, with storms that sometimes lasted for days. But Margha and Garrett weathered them side by side, keeping each other warm and entertained through the long, dark nights. They worked on expanding the cabin further, adding a second room and reinforcing the walls. They made plans for the spring, discussing what crops to plant and what improvements to make. Word of their marriage spread, creating ripples in both communities. Some orcs saw it as the ultimate betrayal, proof that Margha had completely abandoned her heritage. But others, particularly those who were tired of the constant warfare, began to wonder if maybe there was wisdom in her choice. A few more outcast orcs made their way to her mountain, seeking refuge or simply seeking a place where they could live without violence. Among the humans, reactions were similarly divided. Some condemned Garrett as a traitor to his race. His oldest brother refused to speak to him at all. But others, seeing that Margha was not a threat, began to reconsider their prejudices. A few brave souls even began trading with the orcs who had settled near Margha's territory, exchanging goods and, slowly, stories. It was not perfect. There were still incidents, still conflicts. An orc hunting party strayed too close to human territory and was attacked. A human trapper was caught in an orc's territory and barely escaped with his life. But each time violence threatened to spiral out of control, Margha and Garrett stepped in. They mediated, they negotiated, they reminded both sides that the alternative to peace was endless suffering. They were not always successful. They could not stop every fight or heal every grudge. But their presence, their very existence as a mixed couple, provided a powerful counter-narrative to the idea that humans and orcs could never coexist. As spring arrived and the snow melted, revealing the green world beneath, Margha discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly. She had missed her monthly bleeding, and her body felt different in subtle ways. When she finally admitted her suspicion to Garrett, his eyes went wide with wonder and fear. "A child," he breathed. "We are going to have a child." "Half human, half orc," Margha said, her hand moving to her still flat belly. "I do not know what that will mean. I do not know if—" She could not finish the sentence, but Garrett understood. No one knew if a human and an orc could even produce viable offspring. It might be dangerous for Margha. The child, if it survived, would be something entirely new, belonging fully to neither race. "We will figure it out," Garrett said, taking her hands, "just like we have figured out everything else, together." The pregnancy was difficult. Margha's body struggled with the foreign biology she was carrying, and there were times when Garrett feared he would lose her. But she was strong, stronger than any human woman, and she endured. Garrett's mother came to stay with them for the final months, providing care and support. When the baby finally came, on a cool autumn evening, it was unlike anything anyone had expected. The child was a girl, small but perfect, with skin that was a pale green and features that blended human and orc. She had tiny tusks, barely visible, and pointed ears. Her eyes, when they opened, were a brilliant amber. "She is beautiful," Garrett whispered, tears streaming down his face as he held his daughter for the first time. "She is unique," Margha said, exhausted but smiling. "Like us." They named her Alara, a human name that Margha could pronounce easily. She was a good baby, curious and alert, and she grew quickly. Both human and orc visitors came to see her, drawn by curiosity about this unprecedented child. Some were hostile, calling her an abomination. But most were simply awed, seeing in her tiny face a glimpse of what the future could hold. Alara became a symbol, though Margha and Garrett tried to protect her from that burden. She was proof that humans and orcs could not only coexist, but could create something new together. She was hope made flesh. As Alara grew, learning to walk and talk in both human and orcish languages, Margha and Garrett's home became a true crossing point between the two cultures. More mixed families began to form, other brave souls willing to cross the divide. A small settlement grew up near Margha's original cabin, a place where humans and orcs lived side by side, learning from each other. It was not utopia. There were still conflicts, still prejudices. But there was also cooperation, friendship, and slowly, understanding. Children of both races played together, learning that the other was not so different after all. Years passed. Alara grew into a strong, intelligent young woman, proud of both her heritages. She became a leader in the growing movement for peace, using her unique position to bridge gaps that her parents could not. Garrett's hair began to gray at the temples, and Margha's face bore the lines of age and laughter. They had built something remarkable together, not just a family but a community. They had shown that love and determination could overcome even the deepest prejudices. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Garrett reached over and took Margha's hand. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Choosing this path," Margha squeezed his hand. "Never, not for a single moment, you. Never." He smiled at her, the same warm, genuine smile that had first made her heart flutter years ago. "You saved my life that night in the snow, but what you really did was give me a reason to live, a purpose, a family." "We saved each other," Margha corrected gently, "and we built this together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the cabin, they could hear Alara moving about, preparing dinner. From the nearby settlement came the sounds of laughter and conversation, a blend of human and orcish voices raised in harmony. It was not the life Margha had imagined for herself when she was a young orc in her father's clan. It was not the life Garrett had expected when he set out as a trapper. But it was a good life, full of love and purpose and hope. And it had all started on a freezing winter night when an orc woman chose compassion over fear, when she pressed her body against a frostbitten man and shared her warmth, breathing life back into him and, unknowingly, into herself. That night had changed everything. It had set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through both their peoples for generations, all because one woman chose to save a life instead of taking one. "I love you," Margha said into the peaceful evening. "I love you too," Garrett replied. "Always." They sat together as the night deepened around them, hand in hand, two souls who had found each other against all odds. They had faced prejudice and violence, fear and uncertainty. But they had also found love, built a family, and helped forge a new path forward for their peoples. The future was still uncertain. There would be more challenges, more conflicts to navigate, but Margha and Garrett would face them together, just as they had faced everything else. And their example, their stubborn insistence that love could conquer hate, would light the way for others to follow. The stars shone down on the mountain valley, on the mixed settlement, on the cabin where a human man and an orc woman had built their home. It was a small place in a vast world, but it was a beginning, a promise that change was possible, that hope could flourish even in the coldest, darkest times. All because of one night, one choice, one desperate act of kindness that had blossomed into something beautiful and lasting. Their story was not an ending but a beginning, written in love and sealed with courage. And it would be told for generations, a reminder that the smallest acts of compassion can change the world.